I'll just wait till the participants go up. Okay, I'll start. The numbers are still going up as people enter the room. So welcome everybody to the latest N-Circle Student Mentoring Circle. You can catch us up with us on our website, www.ncirclementoring.com. I have the pleasure of introducing a esteemed panel today. We have Sasuke Bennett, a former colleague of mine, but now at Wellington Investments as a product developer. I'll let everybody introduce themselves in a second. We've got Kewe Igoroje, hope I said that right, at MAN, junior quant analyst. And then we have Nana Ashford Affle from SEO London. And what we're going to cover today is interview success and navigating assessment centres. I've got a number of questions that you have fed through, but you may ask the question, who am I? I'm Justin Uckasey. I'm the head of retail multi-asset funds here at LGIM. I also chair the N-Circle mentoring circles overall, which have become really an institution in the asset management industry. We do monthly circles helping people navigate the workforce, but this is a special student edition. So without further ado, I can see Saskia just actually started to drink something. So I'll hand over to Saskia to introduce herself.
Sure, sorry, that was brilliantly timed, wasn't it? Hi everyone, my name is Sasuke Bennett. As Justin mentioned, I work at Wellington Management. I design and launch funds mostly for institutional clients. Before that, I worked at LGIM with Justin, also on the product development side. Before that, I was in consulting. I worked for Alpha Financial Markets Consulting. And before that, I spent 5 years at Architas multi-manager, where I was initially an investment writer. And after a couple of years doing that, I moved to the investment team and was covering emerging market equity and Japanese equity funds. So lots of different companies, lots of different interviews, which, yeah, we'll go into in a bit.
Okay, should we go to Kewe? Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Kewe and I work as a junior quant analyst at MAN AHL. So my job is essentially to develop and implement trading algorithms that we use to hopefully, make our clients some money. My research focus is mainly in alternative markets, or I guess what people might call, exotic markets. So think foreign FX or interest rate swaps. So I guess less vanilla types of financial instruments. And in terms of my experience, so I've been working as a quant analyst for the last year, but before that I was on Man Group's graduate scheme. Where I did that for 2 years, and I rotated across different parts of the business, from quantitative investing to discretionary investing to a little bit of fund of funds. And then before that, I also interned at Man Group. So this is really kind of the main company that I've worked at, but I definitely did have some interviews before then. So I hope that I can share some of those experiences today.
Thank you, Kewe. And finally, our special guest from SEO London, Nana, do you want to give yourself a quick introduction?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Justin. Hi, everyone. My name is Nana Ashford Affle. I'm one of the senior program coordinators at SEO London, and I work within the investment banking and asset management program. I've been there for just over 3 years now. And prior to that, I worked as a customer care officer within the NHS. Just to give you a bit of background about what SEO London does, is that we help students from diverse backgrounds, so ethnic minority, gender, low social mobility backgrounds as well, gain opportunities within elite industries such as banking, corporate law, consulting, insurance, engineering, and then we help them with interviews, assessment centres, and support them through these opportunities.
Fantastic, Nana. Thank you so much for that. So we've got a three-person panel, or three mentors today. So what I'll do, I'll ask the first question. It'll go to all three people. Please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A. Israel, I think we just answered your questions. Everybody's told you about their career. So I think that apart from myself, I'll be very brief on that. It's probably worth me touching on my career. And then, yeah, we'll jump into the questions. Please feel free as we go through to feed it into the chat. I know it's sweltering outside, so thank you for joining us when we're having a heat wave in September, which is a bizarre situation. Right, so myself, I'm a fund manager at LGIM. I manage around £7 billion in multi-asset funds. And before LGIM, I've been at LGIM now for about 8 years, I think. And before that, I was at Aviva Investors, where I did a very similar thing. Merrill Lynch on the wealth management side before that. And I started off in consulting. I'm a co-founder of Talk About Black, which is a movement which is trying to get better representation across the asset management industry and beyond. And as I mentioned, I set up and founded the End Circle Mentoring Circles, which now has become institutionalized, and there's a team kind of running that. So jumping on to the first questions, I can't see any more questions in the chat. Please feel free to drop questions in the chat overall. So first question, and I will direct it to Nana first because you went last on the intros. What was, and we're going straight for the negatives here, what was your worst interview and assessment center experience, or stroke assessment center experience, and what did you learn from it?
Well, I would say being on the interviewer side, or actually being part of assessment centers at different firms that we work with, what I've seen is that, you know, there's candidates who, I wouldn't give a specific example, but what I would say may not be the greatest interview or assessment center is candidates who are not as probably attentive, listening to instructions. With assessment centers, sometimes it's not only just interviews, you have, you know, different group work that you may have to do, or presentations and stuff like that you may have to do. So just not listening to instructions and getting the interviewers or the HR team to be repeating themselves. I've seen that doesn't really hold well when it comes to assessment centers in particular. When it also comes to interviews, is just being, I would say, there's a thin line between being confident and being overconfident. And, you know, with interviews, especially with the people that we work with and the candidates that we support, they're mainly students. So the interviewers know that you might not know everything, or you may, you know, are working towards trying to learn everything. So it's just being slightly humble in your approach when it comes to your interview questions. And if you don't know something, or, you know, just try, and it's always good to let the interviewer know you're not too sure, but always go and do your research and then get back to them and stuff like that. So that's some sort of examples that I will give.
Thank you so much. We'll go to Kewe next, and then to Saskia. Feel free to follow straight on after Kewe.
I guess, would you like as an interviewer or as an interviewee? I think I have both.
It can be either, actually.
Okay. Well, I think just kind of quickly touching on Nana's point about listening, I think that's such a key point, especially when your interviewer at the beginning is kind of telling you about what they do at the beginning. It's always such a good tip to just make sure you're listening at that point, and then come back to it at the end and kind of dig into what they do, because it kind of shows a natural curiosity. I think that's a really easy way to show that you're intuitive, like you're inquisitive, and you're somebody who's kind of willing to learn. I think that's a really simple trick. But I think in terms of as an interviewee, I've had an interview where everything possible went wrong. So I was doing a phone interview for an investment banking internship at Bulge Bracket. And essentially what happened, so first it was between lectures. So I was on campus and I had to book a room. And I only had that room for 30 minutes, but it turned out they called me 15 to 20 minutes late. So halfway during the interview, I'm having to run out of that room because that room was booked and try and find a quiet space somewhere else in the building. So I'm literally like, everyone's coming out of lectures. It's super noisy. I can't hear him because he has a very thick French accent, and the reception was super bad. I remember quite vividly me squatting in like a stairwell, like trying to hear him on the phone. I was trying to answer like these very basic IBD questions that I was just messing up completely. And I remember why I remember that interview so well is because I think what it taught me is that it's so important to not be flustered, like in an interview process. Like, especially now I've become an interviewer, I realize that interviewers are a lot more forgiving than I think a lot of us give them credit for. If I just ask, can I have 5 minutes to try and find a new space, or something like that kind of come up, I think it would have been a lot easier for me to just kind of keep calm during that interview. But because it was one of my first experiences, I thought if I wasn't kind of talking all the time, if I wasn't interacting all the time, especially over a phone interview where it's a lot more difficult to show that you're listening to what the person is saying on the other side of the phone. I think if I had just kind of taken 2 seconds and paused, it probably would have been a lot better, and I might have made it to the next stage of that interview process. So I would say that was probably my worst interview experience. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Saskia?
Sorry guys, I was on mute. I was going to say, completely picking up on the flustered bit. So my worst interview experience, so this was really early on. It could even have been it must have been pre-Architas, so it was for like a sort of summer role. And I remember I set my alarm. In those days I couldn't wake up very early at all. Like, I struggled to get to 9 o'clock lectures. It was really hard. And I had the interview at 8 o'clock, and so I had to set my alarm for 6:30 or something, which was ungodly. That completely switched now somehow. But anyway, so set myself to the best start and set my alarm for 6:30 p.m. instead of 6:30 a.m. And at 7 o'clock, I looked at the alarm. I looked at my clock, and I was like, oh my God, I've got to get myself together and get to this office in the city in no time at all. So started off really, really flustered and, arrived. It's like, so the first thing I learned was, double check your alarm. Second thing is I can actually get better, or get ready more quickly than I ever anticipated. But picking up on Kara's point, I arrived, I was in such a fluster. I went in and I think adrenaline carried me through the first question. They're like, hi, nice to meet you. And I was like, hi, love to meet you. And then they asked me, just to talk about myself. And I started saying, well, I'm a student, and I just completely went blank. And I froze. I couldn't think of anything. I could feel the corners of my mouth like drooping. I could just feel that the whole thing was just crumbling. I was like, and I just sort of sat there, and they were very forgiving, and they said, do you want to step outside for a bit? So I stepped out, took a few minutes, and came back in, and then went on. So again, really pointing out the fact that they were complete human, and they didn't judge me. I'd made the time, thankfully, but they could see that I was in a bit of a state, and so they said, look, take a few minutes and come back, and we'll start again. So that was fortunately turned out okay. But just be calm. And I say what joking aside about the alarm and how quickly I can get ready. I mean, I think the similarly to Kara's point, the biggest lesson I learned was just, your interviewers are going to be, they're humans, and if you're having a bad day, or if you had a bad journey in, or anything like that, just be completely honest. And it's better to say it before than to get the feedback, say we haven't taken you forward, and then you say, oh, but all this, that. It's better to say up front, when you see them, just explain if anything's bothering you.
Thank you so much, Saskia. Sorry, you said about this interview situation. Did you get that job, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay. Well, there you go. Right. Okay. So we've had some questions in the chat. So what I will do, I'll go to those questions. I've got some questions that were submitted before, but I think it's good to go to one of the questions in the chat. I'll direct it to two of you, and then I'll direct the other one to two of you, just so we're mixing it up a little bit. So the first one is advice for students trying to get into investment banking or asset management, in particular, a student which didn't go to a target university, which I imagine must be, I don't know, maybe Russell Group, I don't know. So yeah, if anybody could answer that, I think I will direct that first at probably Nana, and then Koe, and then Saskia, I'll ask you the next set.
Yeah, sure. I think traditionally, especially when it comes to the finance industry, investment banking, asset management, you know, they used to always look at the top university candidates from top universities, Oxbridge, Russell Group. But working with the amount of firms that we work with, and you know, diversity, especially becoming a much more an increased talking point, especially for the past year, it seems that the industry is becoming more open-minded, and you will hear a lot that they're trying to look for more diverse candidates, and you know, not all top candidates go to top universities, right? So a lot of companies and firms are opening up to you know, universities that may not be Russell Group or Oxbridge in particular, especially when it comes to finance. You know, you can study, we've worked with so many students who study pharmacy or art or history at different universities, and they end up becoming top bankers, or at least, you know, going into internships at, you know, these top asset management firms and investment banking firms. So I wouldn't worry too much about, you know, you go into a certain particular quote unquote university that may not be a Russell Group or an Oxbridge, and definitely just concentrate on your grades and concentrate on trying to get the experience, because firms are opening up the mindset that not all, you know, candidates would be coming from Russell Group universities, and there's still very top good candidates that go to non-Russell Group. So just be open-minded and don't worry too much about what university you go to.
Thank you. Koe, do you wanna follow on from that?
Yeah, definitely. So I think Nana's point on just kind of how you're seeing a lot in the industry that is really opening up to all types of diversity. So it's not just racial, gender diversity, it's also like your background. I think a lot of companies these days are beginning to realize that actually a university degree isn't actually that great an indicator as to whether somebody will be able to do a job or not, right? And I also think let's actually just say that that's a negative for your CV. There's so many other ways to kind of beef up your CV in order to make up for anything. So, like, for example, showing interest. Do you have maybe your own? Have you tried trading stocks on your own in the past? For example, are you part of any societies at university? Like, I think there are loads of other ways to show interest and show aptitude, which don't necessarily have to be the traditional academic way. And I think, secondly, I think this is where like companies like SEO kind of come in. So that, like Nana's company come in, like SEO, Rare, 10,000 Black interns, where these companies actually help people from non-target universities, people from not the same kind of, I guess, typical finance backgrounds to access these sorts of companies. So kind of taking advantage of those opportunities as much as possible. And being able to get polished up in all the other types of ways you need to be polished in terms of interview technique and assessment centers. I think if you're able to do that, I don't think going to a non-target will stop you from getting any sort of internship that you wanted, in my opinion.
Thank you, and you know, I can vouch for that. I mean, I've been involved in the investment hiring at graduate level for the past 2 years on the investment floor at Elgin, and the focus, in fact, a lot of the time now, the university actually isn't shown unless the candidate actually mentions it, and the university is actually blanked out. So I don't think that's such a barrier as it was in the past. And also, as Koe said, there are lots of other ways to beef up your CV. And then just moving on to another question that's coming. We've got quite a few in now, so we'll be very busy. The best advice for situational judgment tests, particularly if you've never had office experience. And I'll go to Saskia for that one. As promised, I'll come to you first.
Thanks, Justin. So situational judgment tests, might give away my age now. I'm not sure I knew them when I was when I've been interviewing, but guessing what they, I'm guessing that they're live, kind of, you ask how you're going to behave or how you'll react in a certain situation. So my advice in those kinds of scenarios are just I think there's a bit of a fallacy in kind of separating the corporate and the sort of outside work world, and thinking that, whilst, you need to have a degree of professionalism, I think if you have common sense and apply the same kinds of principles as you would outside of the office, I think that would stand you in good stead. I'd also say explaining your choices and why you're going to go down a certain route, I think, is also a really really important, because I think the interviewers, going back to this question we were just talking about as well, I think interviewers want to see potential. They want to see the way you think. So I think if you can show that you're considered, and your ultimate moral compass and judgment is, they can relate to, which will be more often than not more aligned to what they'd probably be like outside of the office, then I think you should be in a pretty good place.
Thank you. And we'll go to Nana for that one as well.
Yeah, with situational judgment tests, as Saskia mentioned, it's more how you would react to situations even outside of work. So when it comes to those tests, one advice I'll probably give you is sometimes they do ask questions, not only that it's just based on what you do in work when it comes to teamwork or, resolving conflicts, those sort of things, but also look at the firm's values, right? And sometimes they would want you to start thinking about what they value when it comes to certain situations. So let's just say a firm's value is, doing the right thing, or, communicating with customers or something like that. Whatever their value is, try and see how you can tailor your, obviously being your authentic self and how you react to situations is always good, to be honest, but also just start thinking about their values and seeing, if I was to end up at that firm, would I react in this way, or would I react in that way? And that will probably help you with those sort of questions as well. But that's one top tip that I would say that I'll give you when it comes to actually answering those questions. But definitely just try and be your authentic self and thinking about what you want to do in situations when it comes to like teamwork, resolving conflict, communicating. Those are the skills that they're looking for when it comes to situational judgment tests as well.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. When I was applying for jobs and when I was getting into the industry, and it was a while ago. I'm older than Saskia. I didn't have work experience, and lots of people. I went to Warwick University. A lot of people who went to my university had reams and reams of work experience, internships, and so on and so forth. I wasn't able to get one. But what I did have was real life experience of working in places which weren't necessarily professional settings. So, for example, Alan's Fried Chicken, for example, Sports Division, and which doesn't exist anymore, which is now JJB Sports. But actually, I was able to take those situations and explain when I've used leadership or teamwork in those situations. And you don't have to be in a professional setting to show the characteristics which Nana mentioned. And I think that's really important. And I found actually a lot of people wouldn't mention those kind of jobs because they felt that it would show them as being non-professional. But actually, they weren't able then to come up with like real credible examples. So I do think that's really important. Another question that's come in, I'll ask Koe this one first. It's around investment banking interviews. I don't know how many investment banking interviews you've done, so if you haven't done any, then feel free to push this on to somebody else.
Yeah.
But are the majority? Oh,
no, sorry, you first. Sorry.
I was going to say, are the majority of, and I think you can link it back to asset management anyway. Are the majority of interviews competency based? How much technical knowledge should you have? And is there a huge difference between IB and asset management in terms of interviewing?
Okay, so really, apart from the very disastrous phone interview I spoke about at the beginning, I kind of realized pretty quickly IBD wasn't for me. I can explain why if people are interested later. But I think in terms of, I think I can give a little bit of insight at least into what, at least at the internship stage, what's kind of expected in terms of competency interviews and technical interviews. So I think for competency, I think really it's just showing that you've learned from your life experiences. I think that's really that's kind of the major key. And I think in terms of those sorts of interviews, I think a lot of people tend to do like practice. So they'll see your questions like, oh, name a time when you were reflective, or name a time when you've had to make a tough decision, or that sort of thing. And you have to reflect on your entire life and try and find a time where you've had to deal with that sort of situation. But I guess a quick tip for those sorts of interviews is that actually what you want to do is kind of something similar to what Justin was just saying, is actually know what your big experiences in life have been. So what I used to do is I used to have 5 key life experiences, and they were very, very different. And a lot of the time it's good for them to be different, because they'll have all of these cookie cutter, I did an IBD internship here and I did a spring week there. Like, they want to hear actually different experiences. So I think I ran a fashion show in university. I was a maths mentor in sixth form. And I think I had a couple of other ones. And I knew especially exactly every single situation that arose in each of those experiences. And then I would, so when I was asked, when I was reflective, I just knew exactly where I had to go. Okay, I have 5 experiences. These 3 won't work. Which is the best out of these 2? And suddenly you completely like shrunk your field of possible answers. And suddenly you can respond a lot faster and a lot cleaner as well. So I think for competency, really, it's just making sure you know the experiences that are on your CV and how they link to work competencies. I don't think you need to try and be any extra competent than that. Then I think on the technical side, I think this is a little bit difficult, because I think firms that tend to be a little bit different here. Like, some actually expect you to, for example, to understand what DCF analysis is for investment banks, and some actually just kind of want to test what your thinking process is. But I think in a lot of the interview settings I've seen, what they tend to do is try and match the questions to the technical skills of the candidate based on the CV. So for example, if it's very obvious that they've had no IBD experience, the likelihood of them asking in a DCF analysis, how do you, I don't know, calculate the terminal value or blah, 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 it's kind of unlikely. What they probably would do is maybe keep it a little bit more high level and then kind of keep pushing to see where you kind of get to a bit of a resistance point. I think that's probably what's more likely. So I think first, so I'm rambling a bit here, but I think the key thing to do really is to try and make sure that your thinking process is very logical and rational, so that they can follow how you're thinking. So even if you are wrong, even if you aren't as hot on the technicals as you feel like you should be, they can at least say, oh, but she thinks, or he or she thinks about this in a very logical way. I like her thinking process. And I think that's actually what they're kind of more trying to test with the technical, versus can you do X, Y, and Z analysis? Because that can very easily be taught, but a good thinking process, I don't think can be as easily taught. But I think that's my opinion there. Yeah.
Yeah. Nana, I think I've got an answer to this one. Nana, do you want to answer this one as well?
Yeah, I think when it comes to just quickly banking and then IBD and asset management, they are similar, but definitely I feel like with IBD it's slightly more technical from what we've seen, supporting candidates. As Karen mentioned, if they, especially when it comes to early career opportunities, so like summer internships, they are looking that for more if you're curious and you're interested in the industry, rather than having to know every single thing, every technical. They know that once you get on the job or in doing the internship, you will learn a lot. So don't worry too much about having to know every single technical answer. So yeah, that's the only difference I would say when it comes to investment banking. And asset management is more, from what we've seen, it's a bit more, they're looking at your commercial awareness, you know, your what you are interested in when it comes to the market side. Are you more client focused, that sort of thing. So start thinking when it comes to interviews that there may be technical aspects to every division anyway, there is, but yeah, I would say IBD is a bit more technical. Asset management's a bit more, probably the word is, I don't know, commercial, or, you know, more competency based. But definitely it's more when it comes to interviews, especially with IBD, you don't have to have a finance degree to actually get into banking either. So it's just more about doing the research, showing that you're interested within particularly IBD as well.
Yeah, there's a few points that I'd stress here. Thank you, Nana and Koe. A few points I'd stress here. So I've actually, in my time, I've gone for both roles in IBD, or let's say in a bank and in an asset manager. And actually, I mean, there are some differences, but I think some of the differences that I encountered were driven by the actual institutions rather than, so similar to Koe's point, that the institutions and the individuals who are interviewing rather than the actual business. The one thing I always say to people who are looking for a role at graduate level is that everything's really competitive, right? So for the investment floor, for example, a couple of years ago, we had 6 roles and we got, 2,000 applicants, or whatever the number was. And you've got to try and comes us the next question I'm going to ask, actually. You've got to try and stand out from the crowd. And one of the things that I often say is that if somebody has at least an idea of what they're going into and have read up on it and have focus, it can give you the edge versus somebody who simply hasn't, who has applied for lots of different roles in lots of different organizations, in lots of different departments. So the one thing that helped me get my graduate job was that I was focused on being an actuary. And okay, it was the wrong decision for me. And within 6 months, I'd moved out of that and pivoted into another part of the business. But actually having that focus, I know, gave me the edge at interview level, because there were just so many people applying that actually I was just so well read on pensions and, regulations in the actuarial world, which just gave me an edge in terms of trying to find that common ground with the interviewer. So I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying that focus, I often see, gives people it gives people an edge. So that kind of follows on to actually a question that came in was, will the session be recorded? So yes, the session will be recorded, but it won't be sent to you. You need to go onto it's on the website, the Skills Workshop website. It'll be on there in a week's time. You may get an email saying that it's on there, but if not, just please check on the Skills Workshop website and you will see a recording of this session. So what do interviewers expect from interviewees? What makes people stand out? And I'll go to Saskia for this one first, because I see you're feeling very left out, because I haven't come to you for a while.
No, it's all good. It's all good. I'm listening to all these great thoughts. So what do interviewers expect of interviewees? I'd say, I think this is speaking my own view, but I think it's probably quite, hopefully you can, it's not out of this world, but I'd say, first and foremost, someone who's presentable, is respectful. I think we were talking before about being confident but not being overconfident. I think being having seen interviewees who come in sort of all guns blazing and, think they know all the answers and don't listen to questions properly. I think that's not a great start. That will probably rub quite a few interviewers up the wrong way. So I'd say listen. I think listening is key. We talked about this before, but I think interviewers, keep getting the words mixed up, but interviewers expect interviewees to be listening to what they're saying. So even if you don't understand something, or if you don't follow something, I think if the interviewer can see that you've been listening and you say, I'm sorry, do you mind repeating that? That will be reasonable, rather than, if they see that you're looking out the window, or, you're not concentrating on what they're saying, then, they're not going to be quite as amenable to repeating a question or to explaining something. As for what can make you stand out, so in the real world, I say the real world, but in the world pre sort of Zoom and when interviews and assessment centres took place in person, a good handshake is that old adage, a firm handshake, and I think looking someone in the eye, being measured, I think will help you stand out. And then picking up on Justin's point before, knowing what you're in there for, knowing what you're in there to talk about. You can acknowledge the limits of your knowledge if you haven't had real experience yet there. But I think there's no excuse for not knowing, what's on the company's website. I think, yeah, it's being well read in your subject matter and being engaged will make you stand out.
Kerry?
Yeah, I agree with all of Saskia's points. I think to add to that, so as an interviewer, I've really only done virtual interviews. So I guess I can give a little bit of maybe insight there. And then also I tend to focus more on, I guess, more technical interviews, so kind of maths and stats-based interviews. And I would say the first thing that I find quite impressive and what I quite like is when it seems that somebody has a very intuitive understanding of what they're kind of speaking about. I think it can be very obvious sometimes when an interviewee is kind of rambling and trying to get to the right point versus somebody who really understands what they're talking about. So I think an interviewer who's very good at structured response. So STAR, I know everybody talks about it, but people who are very good at STAR, you can tell the difference in terms of their quality of interview response, I think. When they get to the point, it's a lot easier to be able to kind of check off, okay, this person really understands what they're talking about here, and it's not kind of like blind luck, they just happen to get to that potential answer. I also think with kind of video etiquette, I think sometimes interviewees can think that we can't kind of tell that, for example, that they're doing a quick cheeky Google here, or a quick or a quick check of a note there, like on a video interview, because you assume that, because they can't see what's on your table, for example, or they can't see you typing. But as in, a lot of the time you can kind of tell those sorts of things. So really just trying, like, it's more just kind of trying your best in that case. And I think the last thing I would say is, like, you want to come across as somebody, I think this is what makes people stand out in particular. You want to come across as somebody who is kind of easy to build rapport with. So I think I always kind of remember interviews of somebody where, like, the first 5 minutes, it was very easy to speak with them, or the last 5 minutes was very easy to speak with them, because these are people that you're planning to hire into your company, that you're going to be working with for multiple hours a day. You want to feel confident that, you'll be able to kind of sit next to this person. They're able to explain things well. So when you ask them a question, they can explain things, and that they come across as somebody who is actually just kind of pleasant. And I know that seems really like an obvious thing, but I think just somebody who, like, smiles during their interview, or just looks like they're enjoying the process a little bit. It's not like they're terrified. I think just kind of those small things kind of just make it, like, a lot smoother, I think. Yeah.
Thank you, Kerry. Another question that's come in, which I think is is really interesting, actually. Do GCSEs matter? And why that is interesting to me is because only recently I was kind of clearing my desktop, and I clicked on an old CV, the CV that I used to move into my fourth job, which was at Elgin, and I realised that I had my GCSEs on there. And I think it was just historical rather than anything else, because nobody really cared at that point in your fourth job what your GCSEs are. But yeah, to you, Nana, do GCSEs actually matter?
Not well, yeah. Once you get to probably, I'll say Justin's stage, it doesn't really. But and you're on your fourth or fifth job, it doesn't really matter as much. I would say, you know, at this early stage, when it comes to early career programs, they don't focus too heavily on it, but it's you know, ideally, you know, maths and English is the main core GCSEs you really need, or equivalent. It doesn't have to be GCSEs. So maths and English mainly. Any other subjects really doesn't. I would say even across the board, not only banking industry, but across the board, I don't think a lot of, unless it's tailored to, you know, a certain industry, you know, maths and English, I think, is the core that you need to have, or that is good to have. But I would say, yeah, early stage maths and English is the core, really. Once you get into later stages, not so much. It's more about experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say, though, your CV needs to tell the same story that you're going to tell in the interview, right? So, you know, if you're going to say, I have always excelled, or one of your strengths and the narrative you want to get over is you've always excelled at maths since you were like 5 years old, you kind of want a thread through your CV showing that you've demonstrated that since you were 5 years old. Otherwise, the CV isn't really telling the story you want it to. But overall, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I don't think if I ever do move jobs again, I'll have my CVs on, my GCSEs on there. And to be honest with you, my GCSEs are like you know, it's the old A to C methodology, and everyone's using numbers right now. So you know, it's just shows how old I am. So I now will ask another question. How can you best answer? It's very broad, actually. How can you best answer motivational questions? And Saskia, I think, I'm going to come to for that one.
Cool. Motivational questions. So I think for these kinds of questions, I think it's similar to the situational judgment questions. I think it's about drawing from real experiences. So I think before any interview or assessment centre, as Kara said, you know, think back to some sort of rich, I want to say, you know, rich seams of experiences that you've had in your life so far. So, you know, that can be academic, that can be sporting, that can be musical, you know, entrepreneurial outside of school. And I think you also need to have a think specifically for these ones about what, I mean, this is a question I grapple with myself, so I'm not expecting, you know, it's something I hadn't really thought about at all when I was, you know, early 20s, but you know, what does motivate you? What do you really enjoy? What, you know, if you have been able to identify, you know, maybe, I mean, I hope that if, you know, any subjects you're studying at university, you do enjoy them. But, you know, think about what kinds of, what are the modules within that you particularly enjoy? Do you like the logical, or, you know, the sort of clear-cut answer aspects? Do you like the more open questions? And I think just thinking about those kinds of things, what motivates you at work, well, I mean, academic work, how having, you know, it's all of this kind of self-awareness, this idea of self-awareness and who you are. And I think, I don't think that anyone, I'm not sure I would expect someone at 20 to know this. And if they did, you know, you might also think, you're labeling yourself too soon. You need to keep your mind open. But I think just having an awareness of self-awareness will be good, if that makes sense. So kind of an awareness of what you really enjoy, what makes you tick, and then you can draw from that when you talk about motivation, when you answer motivational questions at interviews.
Well, that's a really good answer. Kelly, should we come see you for this one as well?
I don't know if I actually have too much to add to that. I think really, like, what you kind of want is that, so if they ask, you know, why are you interested in IBD? Why are you interested in asset management? Like, firstly, don't pretend that you kind of really understand the industry at 20. You know, I think we have this assumption that, you know, we have to know all of the different instruments and all of the different facets of the industry and all of that. And I don't think that's actually what that question is really trying to address. I think what that question, those sorts of questions really want to tell you is, to what extent have you actually thought about whether this is a job that actually suits you and how Sasuke was kind of talking about self-awareness, like understanding whether this job will work for you and whether you actually suit that job. And the easiest way to do that is really to understand really the skills required for the job, because I think that requires specialist knowledge at all, to understand what the skills are required. So I'll choose my job. So it's necessary to be quite quantitative, quite detail oriented, quite technical, be able to communicate quite difficult concepts in a way that is easy to understand, and understand the skills that your job that job requires, and then kind of draw on your experiences and show that you've actually been able to demonstrate those skills, and those are skills that you actually enjoy utilizing. I think if you're able to kind of draw those sorts of parallels, as Sasuke was saying, I think then it's a lot easier to believe that you're actually motivated to do this sort of job, versus, you know, trying to understand the entire industry and saying that you understand things that you might not, and kind of tripping yourself up a little bit by accident at interview. Yeah.
Sorry, Justin, can I also just add a quick point as well? I think what Kewe and Saskia mentioned, and definitely I agree. I think when it comes to motivational questions, like, for example, what do you define as success in your career? What would you like to do in 5 years? Those sort of things. There's not a set way to answer those questions. It's definitely just drawing from your professional and personal experiences. And then, you know, I 100% agree with Kewe, is definitely try and think about the skills required for that role, because that's the main thing. That, you know, at your stage, you're not going to be completely experienced in the field, knowing everything about that field, but it's more about what you've learned from your experiences and what you would like to do and your goals and aspirations, as Saskia mentioned, and then trying to, you know, carefully just trying to relay that to them, and they will definitely see if, you know, this job is right for you, if this industry is right for you, and if the firm that you are applying for is right for you as well. So definitely think about the firm's values, the firm's, you know, what the firm's currently doing. If they're interested in philanthropy and you're big on charity, what are those sort of, you know, things that you can be thinking about when it comes to why that firm, what division, why that role. Yeah.
No, thank you. A very, very helpful interjection there. And now that you're going to get this question first, Nana, this next one, which is and I want to ask this to everybody actually, which resources have you found helpful in your career, or what resources would be useful for the students on the line?
I'm not from a finance background, so I wouldn't have anything particularly that would be, you know, what helped me within finance. But I do hearing from a lot of students and the firms, you know, reading things like, you know, the FT, Wall Street Oasis, those listening to podcasts. I think there's a podcast on BBC, I think Wake Up to Money, I think that's what it's called, or something along those lines. Listening to those things, reading, you know, financial news and those things, they open up your commercial awareness. So then you're able to actually know a bit more about what's happening within in the markets. As well as that, I think, you know, there's, I've forgotten what it's called now, amplified trading programs as well. Yeah, I think someone just put in the chat, Wake Up to Money. Yeah, so I think there's amplified trading courses, but there's a lot of courses online. I think I might have a few names, so I'll put them in the chat if people can see it as well. Yeah.
I just had a bit of a chuckle there on Wake Up to Money, because I was on Wake Up to Money last Wednesday. So yeah, it's a great resource for everybody. It's very good to even go on it, and the conversation really flows. I'd actually say, you know, it depends on what areas you're planning to focus on. From an investment perspective, I would always say, you know, sign up to Twitter, get Bloomberg, so you get the news flashes on what's happening with Bloomberg. BBC Business is also very good in terms of just understanding what's happening in the world. I think in terms of self-reflection, motivation, and driving yourself, there's always a few books that I recommend. I think I've got it behind me. Yeah, I've got it behind me. Yeah. 7 Habits of Effective People by Stephen Covey, an absolute classic in terms of how you motivate yourself, how you drive yourself. And there's another one as well, which I don't think I've got behind me. I can't see it there, but it's a great book by Ray Dalio, and it's called Principles, and it's all about his journey through asset management. I think that's really powerful. And if you don't want to, you know, you're not a fan of reading huge books, you know, the audio books, you can go onto Blinkist and get very shortened versions of those books. So they'll summarize the books in a very quick way. I think that those two are actually really powerful, and yeah, I'd recommend those. Kewe? What are you drinking? Sorry.
Sorry, no, it's okay. So I really like the podcast idea. Actually, podcasts weren't super big when I was applying for internships. Not that it was that long ago, but they weren't really that about. But I think it's such an easy way, like you're on a train going somewhere on your own. It's such an easy way to just kind of pick up information quite passively. I remember when I was applying, I was super bad at making sure I was keeping up with kind of commercial awareness stuff. Because I think you kind of find it a little bit overwhelming, right? Like there's so many different ways, like so much information out there. It's like, how do I filter this? But I think kind of like what Justin was saying earlier, bite-sized chunks. Like for example, I have the Financial Times on my phone. I just get an alert, and it's just a headline. But a lot of the time, eventually, I'll see something like, oh, actually, I want to read about that a little bit more. I think that's a lot easier. So you kind of get a bit of a lay of the land, and then you kind of dig into what you're actually interested in, versus trying to be a bit too intense, and also making it a bit more difficult for you to actually commit. Like saying you're going to do an hour a day, that's a lot more difficult when you're in university. But if you know that every couple of hours you get a blast on your phone, and that helps you kind of trigger and kind of think about it, I think that's a lot easier and a lot easier to stick to, versus trying to pin those sorts of hours for commercial awareness. I think also in terms of courses, I think Udemy is the best site. You learn everything. You can learn anything on Udemy. So I think I learned how to build financial models when I was doing a discretionary investing rotation using Udemy. And then I think I think those are kind of the main ones. I'd say podcasts. I would say get anything that's kind of like a blast onto your phone, like it actually comes up in your notifications, so that you're kind of passively taking in information. And then Udemy. Yeah.
What was the resource you said? Udemy?
Yeah, Udemy. I might even be pronouncing it wrong, it's very possible, but it's UDEMY. And they just have courses for everything. Yeah, they have courses for everything on there. You can learn to be anything using that.
Okay,
so I think, yeah.
I'd never heard of it, so thank you. That's really helpful. So I'm learning. Saskia.
Sorry, I was still muting. So yeah, I think I'd agree with all of the ones that have been mentioned so far. I'm familiar with. Yeah, I use BBC Business. Resources, I have to admit, when I first heard that, I was thinking of kind of looking for jobs and kind of scoping out the market from that perspective. So I've kind of got some thoughts on that as well. But just to add my the other resources that I use, Investment Week. There's a free subscription that that anyone can sign up to. You can get emails daily. You can get their most read each week. They cover a real breadth of asset management topics, from retail, wealth management, asset management, markets, and I think in quite an accessible way. Bloomberg, we've mentioned, have a look at that. I think you can also get the notifications, because as Kerry said, notifications are, I try and silence as many as possible, but then when it comes to news, it's great. Money Week is also one you might want to have a look at. This one, Justin, you might correct me here, but I'm pretty sure when I was at Architas, we used something called Trading Watch. That's or Market Watch, maybe I'm conflating two. And that's just for kind of quite raw market data, if you're interested, if the screens of Bloomberg are a bit overwhelming. So yeah, that's on the kind of, I was trying to think back to my bookmarks bar on my work browser, and I think that's pretty much covered the important ones. In terms of resources when you're starting off in your career, though, I'd say university careers services, careers fairs are a great start. I think a lot of them help you when, after your first few years of graduating as well. I know I certainly was using mine just to get some ideas, and I think more and more universities as well are doing kind of alumni networks as well for recent graduates, and so you can be in touch with graduates. My first job, Architas, I got in a roundabout way through read.co.uk. Just after I graduated, I signed up and I applied for about 1,000,001 jobs, including like zookeeper and all sorts. But one of them was a role for Fidelity. That got me onto the books of a recruiter called Mason Blake, who are quite big in the investment management space. And there are a number of recruiters as well who, at graduate level, I know that graduate level roles aren't quite as covered by recruiters, but if you're looking for people to talk to, then you can maybe give them an idea, and they'll be able to give you some views, and for them it could be another person on their books, a kind of an early career person they can kind of monitor and potentially reach out with an opportunity. And then I'm not suggesting that anyone starts studying these. You've got your degrees to get through, which is more than enough. But just for awareness, the kinds of qualifications that we look at in asset management anyway are the likes of the investment management certificate, the IMC. I'm not sure if those kinds of books are available in libraries, but I mean, the IMC I remember being quite dense and quite dry. But if you just skip through and have a look at the topics that are covered, I found that really, really helpful, just kind of getting an awareness of what was in the industry and what people were thinking about. And likewise for the CFA, again, not saying to start studying for those before you graduated at all, but if you wanted to just kind of get that sense, maybe if you're not in a financial subject, if you're not studying a financial subject for your degree, if you can get hold of some old books or look online for curriculums and stuff, that could give you an overview.
Sorry, could I just add one to the list for that? Student Ladder is amazing. I don't know if anyone's ever used it before, but I think literally from sixth form up to like third year of university, it gives you literally all internships and all of the programs available for not just in finance, but also across loads of different other industries as well. So if you're interested in fast moving consumer goods, for example, or something like that, it has everything everything there. So I'll just like to plug them really quickly.
Really helpful. Thank you, all of you. I would say I'm just on the FT, the Financial Times. I know Kerry mentioned it, but it's when you look at I read the Wall Street Journal, I read New York Times, I read a number of financial newspapers in the world. I think the Financial Times is #1 in the world, to be honest. It covers, the breadth of it is just fantastic. So if you are looking to get into IBD or asset management, as this call is about, I would focus. I wouldn't focus. I would read the FT and try to just pick up the main headlines every day. It just gives you a nice flavour of what's happening in the financial world. Another question from Pravan, who's doing a Masters of Finance and Accounting at Warwick. So he says that sales, his previous experience in sales and business development has affected his applications. And even though he's in financial societies, he manages his own personal portfolio. Do we have any advice for him to make those skills that he's developed more translatable? So I'm presuming here he wants to land a more technical investment type of role. So I think I'll ask Kewe is the obvious one to ask for this one.
So in terms of the sales and business development, so he's saying, I'm assuming that you mean that because those are the kind of maybe like work experience that you've had so far. I'm assuming that's what he means. And if that's the case, I don't think that should hold you back at all from getting internships and getting any further in an application process. I think I have to admit, I do genuinely believe that these days I don't think they are as restrictive with the types of experiences that they want to see. I think a lot of companies, I think many of them are trying to, I think in terms of transferable skills, what you kind of need to do is kind of write a list of the skills that the job that you want requires, and then a list of the skills that you think you have based on your experiences, and kind of link those up and make sure to highlight those during your interview. I think that's kind of the key. That's kind of the key in terms of showing that even though this is where your experience lies, you have the skills required to do the types of jobs that you are interested in. I think that, and the fact that you actually have a personal portfolio of investments, I definitely did not have that when I was applying. So that, and the fact that if you're able to do that, and then also highlights not just the fact that you have these personal investments, but also actually kind of talk about the experience of investing, because a lot of people actually don't have that experience. So how do you manage risk, for example? Like, how do you make sure that you're not losing too much money in a day? Or how, like, actually talking about the experiences in a bit more detail. So not just you have a personal portfolio, but the skills that you've had to build up and the experiences you've had in managing that personal portfolio. I think that kind of shows enough, definitely, that you have the skills that can be transferred into any sort of technical role, I think, yeah.
Yeah, probably. I'll come on to Nana with this one in a second. But given that you've got a master's, you're studying for a master's in finance and accounting at Warwick, and you've got this societal experience and the personal portfolio, I don't think sales and business development is the thing that's holding you back from getting roles. And maybe we need to kind of elaborate a little bit more on this, because I've only got the question. But I definitely try and dig deeper into, if you are getting a lot of rejections, I'll try and dig deeper into why you're getting those rejections. And I find it, I mean, I've done a lot of interviews, and I spoke to people who obviously do lots of interviews and liaise with them, and I don't remember anybody from investment roles in an investment position saying they've rejected somebody because they had too much sales or business development experience. Actually, sales and business development experience is a key element to an investment role. As you get, particularly as you get more senior, a key element of, in fact, even before you get more senior, a key element of investing is selling your ideas to people. it's trying to raise money from clients is key. So actually, they're actually key skills to an investment or a more technical role. I don't know, Nana, if you've got any thoughts on that.
I think both you and Kerry covered everything, and just to reiterate, it's definitely from what you've mentioned, your masters, your experience, everything. I think is probably how you are, what you're writing in your application, and how you're responding to your interview answers. Let's just say if you do have interviews. So I think it's mainly you knowing what correct information to put in an application or in your interviews. So definitely I agree with Kerry about finding the skills required for that role. So what I tell candidates all the time is as simple as going onto Google, typing out skills required for an investment analyst or something like that. And Google's your best friend. It will give you all the skills that you require, and then trying to look at what skills you've gained from sales, business development, all those different things, and how they relate to the skills required for that role. That's the only thing that you can really do. And then is probably what they're asking in your application and in your interviews. But definitely, as Justin mentioned, the best thing you can do is ask the firms that you're applying for feedback. Not everyone will be able to give you feedback, but some firms maybe, or some recruiters and interviewers may be able to give you feedback, and then use that to help you in your next interview or your next application. But yeah, Justin and Kerry, they covered everything.
Thank you, Nana. So we've got a few more questions to go through. I think I'll just go to one person for each of these, and then we'll try and finish up. I will ask you all three for closing comments, and one sentence to inspire the audience at the end. So just warning you. So if you had finished all your work and meetings for the week, so there's somebody who got a question at an interview. So if you finished all your work and meetings for the week, what would you do? What would your, as a person, what would you do? So I will go to Sasuke for that one.
Thanks, Justin. I saw this question come up, and I think it's a really interesting one. If I'm honest, it would really depend on how I was feeling, the kind of week I'd had, the kind of month I'd had, the kind of, quarter. So not to instill any fear, but, I find that I have a never-ending to-do list of things to read, things, small little jobs that frankly usually get done at Christmas when it's really quiet, and there aren't many people in the office. If by sort of lunchtime on a Friday, if I had enough energy and I had the mental capacity to tackle one of those, then absolutely I would do it. But I have to be honest, come Friday afternoon, a lot of weeks I know that's probably my least productive time. The end of the week, the last couple of hours, I tend to reserve gentler tasks for that. Like I try and hold back some stuff for that kind of time. But one thing I think I've learned, particularly in the pandemic, if I'm honest, is the need to kind of be balanced and recognize how you're feeling. And there were times I think early on in my career when you think, right, I've got to just carry on working, and I think you see it in sports as well. You've got to carry on training, but your mind as well as your body, you've got to realize that point when doing more is actually doing more harm than good. And sometimes it can be beneficial just to say, right, there was one of my first bosses, I think his cup of productivity or his limit of productivity had been reached, and any more time he would spend would be time wasted. I think it's really important not to take liberties, and I think you need to kind of find that limit yourself. But I'd say if you do think you're finding it, speak to your line manager. So I would, if I got to the end of the week and, I'd finished all my work and it was like, I don't know, 2 o'clock on a Friday, and I was feeling really wiped out, I'd say to my line manager, I'd say, there's nothing more pressing. All my week meetings are done. I'm going to, chip away at this stuff. But, if I'm honest, I could do with an hour or two just to chill and wind down. I think it will set me up for a more productive Monday. So I think, the long roundabout way, but I'd say depends on how I'd feel. Either get through some easier task on my to-do list, or cut my losses maybe and say, right, that's been a good week and it's time to have a mental break for a bit.
I might just add something here. So I think this question to me it's not. I think it's about your general emotional awareness of what's happening in the overall team. That's why I perceive it, and maybe I'm perceiving it the wrong way. But and understanding your level of work relative to other people's, which I think is really important. So, if you finish your work, for example, on a Wednesday at 2 p.m. and the rest of the team are working frantically to meet a deadline, and you can log off and say, well, I'm done with my work, then clearly that's a bit of a problem there. But at the same time, if you've been flat out all week and the rest of the team have been doing research and projects and you've been crunching like financial models for a tight deadline, then I think the situation is very different. But I think a way to answer this at that point is to assess what other people are doing in the team by asking questions and understand what the overall level of work that needs to be done versus capacity in the team is overall. I think that to me it is really key, because one of the most frustrating things, particularly in a virtual world, is that it's very difficult to know what people's capacity is, and unless people are going to tell you what their capacity is, it is virtually impossible. So I agree with everything Saskia said about mental health and balance and so on and so forth. But I would just it's all relative as well, right? So and understanding that, I think, is really important. How do I improve my commercial awareness? I think this has to go to Kewe.
Okay. The thing is, I want to pretend that I was very good at keeping up with the news and stuff when I was applying for jobs, but I won't lie, I definitely wasn't. But I guess what I can give is a tip, which is what I used to do is that when I had interviews coming up, so interview season was coming up, I used to essentially backfill my commercial awareness. So what I would do is that the last year, I'd look at kind of what had been happening for the last year. So, and I'd use articles online to essentially build a literal timeline of what had kind of been happening for the past year. And I found that actually doing that activity, the doing of that activity, helped me to build up the commercial awareness that I kind of required for interviews. So that would be kind of my tip, because I find, especially with university and you're already having to get early for lectures, it's hard to find time to make sure you're keeping up with things a lot. So if you do get to a point where you have an interview coming up and you feel like you don't know anything, I found that activity super useful as just an exercise in kind of forcing you to kind of think about, what has been happening recently. And then I would also say, in terms of in terms of commercial awareness, I think really it's just having a bit of a sense of the big topics of what's going on at the time. So when I was applying in 2016 for internships, and the big things were Brexit referendum and Trump. And so therefore I knew that those would definitely come up in interview, and they can come up in kind of a variety of ways. So what you kind of want to do is just have a fundamental understanding of what's kind of going on in those two big kind of mega topic, in those two big mega topics. So I remember in one of my commercial awareness interviews, somebody asked me, what did I think the effect of Trump being elected would have on the US stock market? And I knew nothing about stocks at the time, but I did know that Trump didn't believe in climate change. So that would be good for old power types of companies, and then not great for renewable companies. And knew that Hillary was against big profits for pharmaceuticals. So I knew that would be good for pharmaceuticals. So kind of being able to, it's not just kind of having the knowledge, but also knowing how to apply it in unfamiliar situations. And then kind of, I think the last thing I'll kind of say on commercial awareness is, I think, like looking at kind of 2020, I think in terms of commercial awareness, it's an easier time to interview because there's just so much going on. As in, so it's very easy to know what kind of big topics will come up in interview. You'll know, okay, with coronavirus, which stocks do you think did better? Why have interest rates fallen? And a lot of it's a lot easier to contextualize because, you know, we're actually living in a very different time. So I think in terms of commercial awareness, it's probably even a little bit easier than it is usually to know what's kind of going on, because we're living in it right now. And so all you have to really do in terms of getting a bit better is just being able to understand, okay, what impact does all of these things that have been happening around me, what is that impact on markets? So me staying at home all the time, what has that done to retail stocks versus tech stocks, for example? Just being able to draw those parallels. I think that's kind of the key to kind of being able to be good at commercial awareness versus just kind of knowing, okay, so the pandemic has happened, but not understanding the effects of that.
Mm-hmm. That's an excellent answer. Just before I move on to Nana to ask her the best questions to ask at the end of an interview, a cheeky question just came in when I'd already struck the line on the questions about if you have very little financial knowledge, but want to get into ESG, and your experience is only on the environmental side, is it possible? And I think the answer is definitely yes, it is possible. It's important to recognise that ESG isn't just about the environment. Clearly, there's a social aspects and a governance aspect as well. But I would just, if you know and you already have that focus, you want to move into ESG. This is going to be a big area for asset managers, and we're all learning about this, as we're managing money. So, I think having an environmental perspective would actually be really helpful and useful. But it is also really important, clearly, to read up on the other areas and understand the other areas as much as you can, because that will potentially give you an edge in an interview situation. Nana, best questions to ask at the end of an interview?
This is a question that we get a lot, but I think the safest option mainly would be, and that's what I think I think it might have been Kerry that mentioned it at the beginning, is listening to your interviewer, and when they introduce themselves, or if just let's just say they who your interviewer's name is going to be before you go into the interview. What I would do is that, or what I would advise candidates is to do research on the interviewer. So LinkedIn, great place to just see what their role is, and see what they're doing, what not. And then when it comes to interviews, you can ask them questions based on what they're doing in their team, or what their team is working on. So you can ask them personally, like, what is the greatest thing that you've, or project or thing that you've done within your team or at the firm that they're working at now, or that you're interviewing at. I think that's probably the safest option. You can ask them pretty much a variety of different things, but I would say, yeah, definitely something more personable to the interviewer is a good way to start. Also, probably ask them, let's just say that you're interested in, and that's where your research on the firm comes in handy. So your research, let's just say they're good at philanthropy work, or you know, working in the diversity space, what sort of work they're doing in diversity space. You know, right now we're in a pandemic, what has their team or the firm done for their employees, or, you know, within the markets, and to deal with this pandemic, something like that. So use what is around you in as a basis for your questions. So yeah, I would just say the safest option mainly is to probably try and ask the interviewer like a more personal question about why they stayed at this company for so long. What was the greatest thing about where they're working now, or their team? But yeah, I don't know if anyone else has anything to add.
I think that's a great answer, actually. And we're running out of time as well, so I will. I'll move on to closing remarks. Before I do that, I'll answer this last question. I can see some questions will come into the chat rather than the Q&A. We'll get the End Circle team to try and answer those questions after the session. But I think this last question is actually really important. And in your closing remarks, you might want to touch on this question. It's how do you deal with rejection? And one of the questions I often ask in an interview is, you know, what will you do if you don't get this role? Because I think that, and what I'm trying to measure there is the almost a level of resilience, or a level of, or understand how this person deals with failure. And resilience means lots and lots of different things. It's not just this. But I do think actually understanding or dealing with rejection and dealing with things not going well is a really important part of work. So how would I deal with rejection? It's understanding why I've been rejected in detail. It's not always possible to get feedback. So maybe it's reaching out to people who are experienced and you know, running through the Q&A with people. And then it's really just trying to improve and do better. And I just add, you know, all throughout my career, I've dealt with failure and rejection. And actually, those failures and rejections, how I think have made me a better firm manager today, because you learn so much about yourself. And life's all about learning. And actually, even when you get into the workplace, you're continually learning and you're continually dealing with setbacks and failures. So understand how you bounce back from that, I think, make you a better person, but also kind of more specialized and better in your role as well. So closing remarks, please just one sentence if you can. Otherwise I will kind of ring a bell. No, it's not joking. The closing remarks, one sentence. I will go to Saskia first.
Okay, my closing remarks. I've got three key takeaways that I think from this call webinar. The first, when it comes to interviews and assessment centres, stay calm. You know, if something does go wrong, doesn't matter, just stay calm. Don't get too stressed. Admit if you're really stressed, say it, and you know, just say, oh, I'm really nervous, but stay calm. Read up on the role as much as you can, but don't be afraid of any gaps in your knowledge that, you know, don't think the interviewers are going to expect you to know everything about the role before you got there. That's what you can ask them about. And the third, and I think is the most important, is just be yourself, be authentic. Don't try to be who you're not, who you think the interviewers want you to be. Just be yourself, because otherwise long term it could be not only short term could it be awkward, but long term, if you do get the role based on being someone else, it could be grim. So yeah, 3 points. Not quite one.
Fantastic. That was a very long sentence. And Nana?
Just very quickly, something that I took away from the head of diversity at the time at Bloomberg, and she mentioned she goes through her life thinking about the 3 Bs, and when it comes to interviews, jobs, whatnot, is being fearless, being visible, and also being curious. So think about those three things and how, you know, be a go-getter, go for the roles, you know, don't let rejection hold you back, because we go through rejection in life. Being visible, try and attend as many sessions. You being here and attending these sessions is showing that, you know, you are trying to get yourself out there and learn more, especially as being curious as well. So do your research on your roles, the industry, and always be willing to learn.
Kelly?
Okay. The thing is, I had an interesting rejection story, but I think what I will round off with is, I think it's that saying that, you know, success lies at the intersection of, is it preparation and luck, or luck and opportunity or something like that. And I think that's actually the key thing. I think really you don't want to be taking rejection personally, especially once you get to the assessment center stage. Anybody can really do that job at the assessment center stage. Sometimes just somebody happens to be better on the day, or the person just happened to get a better bag of interviewers, better bag of questions. So I think rather than making it your sole goal to just get the job, make sure that you're always kind of working on improving yourself, which is something that we did mention today. So rather than, oh, I didn't get the job, that's it, get the feedback. Okay, so in this interview, they said that my commercial awareness was lacking. I know that's what I need to work on next time. If you get rejected again, okay, they said I wasn't too good in team games here. Okay, this is what I need to improve on next time, and kind of make your goals, put steps into getting that goal of the internship, so that you can keep yourself motivated and you can see that you're improving. I would say that would be my way of looking at how to deal with rejection in a way that's more positive and constructive.
Thank you. Absolute gold dust there. And I suppose it's probably helpful to end with a quote from Nelson Mandela, and it feeds into this rejection point. I never lose, I either win or I learn. So I will leave you with that. Thank you, Nana. Thank you, KOA. Thank you, Saskia. Absolutely brilliant. Gold dust advice there for our students. Take care, everybody. And hopefully we will see you soon at an N-Circle student mentoring circle. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.